Today, we will confront the dark truth behind one of the world's most mysterious and fascinating ancient cities. Buried beneath the sand, forgotten for centuries, then rediscovered to the amazement of the entire world, Petra. But behind this magnificent beauty lies another story that has been overlooked. Giant structures leaning against the rocks, intricately carved decorations, tombs carved meters high. These are not just works of art to be admired, they are traces shaped by blood, sweat, and tears. Every detail we see today is a trace left by the people who worked there, pushing their limits and sometimes even sacrificing their lives. Imagine, under the scorching sun, in narrow valleys where even breathing becomes difficult, you must carve massive rocks inch by inch with primitive tools. Moreover, you never know when the rocks will collapse, which dust will clog your lungs, or whether the work you started in the morning will leave you stranded there by evening. Petra was not just a city, it was a massive tomb that had turned into a nightmare. Why was this city built? Who built it? And what kind of sacrifices had to be made behind this dazzling beauty? Now, we will explore the hidden darkness that Petra conceals beneath its surface. Why it was built, Petra's purpose and function. Petra was not only a city filled with magnificent stone structures, but also a showpiece, a symbol of power, and a transit point. This city was built in the 4th century BC by a wealthy civilization called the Nabateans, right in the heart of the vast trade routes that stretched from Arabia to the Mediterranean. Petra's purpose was not solely trade. In those days, wealth was displayed by carving it into stone. Petra's massive temples, monumental tombs, and palace facades, carved into the cliffs, in a sense proclaimed this people's power and faith to the world. At the same time, Petra hosted religious ceremonies, royal tombs, and spiritual rituals. Thus, this city was a sacred place serving both the living and the immortal. However, this splendor came at a price, and that price was hidden behind the stones in every corner of the city. These structures did not come into being on their own. The story of those who built them still echoes behind the silence of the stones today. Who worked? Workers, slaves, artisans. Petra's magnificent structures, skillfully carved facades, and palace-like tombs did not appear out of nowhere. This massive stone city was built by the labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people whose numbers are unknown. Who were these people? Those who worked in Petra were not just skilled craftsmen. The labor force required by the wealthy Nabatean society was drawn from slaves, impoverished individuals unable to pay their debts, stonemasons brought from distant regions, and even, at times, people forced to work against their will. Some had inherited this craft from their fathers. They knew how to hold a chisel and which stone to cut, but most had no idea what to do when they first picked up a pickaxe. All they knew was that they had to start work before dawn, finish their tasks by sunset, and return home safely. Moreover, this was not just a physical struggle. The work in Petra was carried out on the edges of high cliffs, on loose sandstone, so it was not just about working, but about living with death at every step. And behind every intricate detail carved into those stones was the sweat, effort, and sometimes the last breath of a worker whose name no one knew. Petra may enchant millions today, but most of the hands that shaped it never saw this admiration nor had their names carved into stone. Challenging conditions, heat, sandstorms, thirst. The toughest enemy the workers faced while carving Petra wasn't the rocks, but nature itself. Work started at the crack of dawn because, as the sun rose, the sky turned into a furnace. The temperature would go above 40 degrees Celsius. The stone walls would absorb the sun's heat, and every surface would become scorching hot. Even standing in the shade was a luxury, as most of those massive rocks had not yet been carved, and these people had no take refuge in. However, the heat was not the only issue. Petra was located in the heart of an arid desert climate, a region dominated by sandstorms. A sudden gust of wind would carry fine desert sand into the workers' eyes, noses, and lungs. These storms were so intense that sometimes visibility was zero, and people would lose their way on the rocky terrain where they were working. Forget about swinging a pickaxe, even breathing was impossible. And, of course, there was the issue of thirst. Water sources in Petra were quite limited. Although the Nabateans had built an engineering marvel of a water system, this system was primarily for the upper class and buildings. Workers, on the other hand, were often forced to work for hours under the scorching sun without access to water. Lips cracked, heads spun, but hands kept working because stopping meant punishment. When all these factors combined, working in Petra was not just a job but also a struggle for survival. Rock carving hazards. Petra's massive rock structures may appear to be flawless works of art when viewed from the outside, but what was the reality behind them? Every millimeter of those stone facades was carved out while dancing with death, because building Petra meant going inside the rock, carving it out, and advancing step by step. This always brought up the same question: when will the rock above me collapse? Because these stones were not ordinary stones. Most of Petra was made of sandstone. In short, its structure was porous, soft, and highly susceptible to crumbling over time. If a master mason struck the rock too deeply with his chisel, tons of rock fragments could suddenly break off from above, burying those trapped in the narrow cavity alive. There was no ventilation in the areas the workers were carving, no light, and sometimes even the exit route could be lost. And it wasn't just those working inside who were at risk. The workers carving the massive monumental facades on Petra's surface had to work on primitive rigs secured with ropes along the edges of high cliffs. A slip of the foot, a broken rock fragment, if that happened, the worker would plummet down, crashing into the hard rocks below. Their body was often never found because they fell into a collapsed cavity or a deep crevice, drowning. Yes, you heard right, that happened to the dust that accumulated while working in the hidden cavities of Petra would clog the workers' airways, slowly filling their lungs, causing them to collapse with a feeling of suffocation. Some would die silently there, and when their bodies were found the next day, the stones around them would still be warm. Carving a stone in Petra was as easy as erasing a life. If these stones could speak, each would whisper the story of the person buried beneath it. Those who died in accidents and mass graves. Petra may enchant tourists today with its magnificent stone structures, but hidden among those stones lies another invisible graveyard. No headstones have been erected, nor are their names inscribed upon them. Only lost traces remain. For during the construction of Petra, the people who lost their lives in the countless accidents that occurred were not recorded in the pages of history, but remained buried within the stone. Workers buried by rockfalls, artisans who fell to their deaths on the cliffs, young people who suffocated. Most of their bodies could not even be retrieved from the dangerous areas where they lived. They were hastily buried in graves dug between the stones, of unknown depth, in the valleys outside Petra or in secluded areas near the construction site. Sometimes, multiple people were placed in the same pit and quickly covered up because construction could not be halted. Some modern researchers have identified regular burial lines in certain areas around Petra. This indicates that death was so widespread that it had become almost systematic. So, as you walk along the slopes of Petra, you may be unknowingly stepping over the remains of dozens of workers who were once buried there. They were simply forgotten because they were not kings. Their names were not carved into stone but into silence. Petra continued to grow, but the lives they left behind faded away without a trace. How were the carved facades carved? As you walk towards the heart of Petra, you suddenly come across these huge rock faces. When you see them, the first thing that comes to mind is, how did people do this? The answer is simple. Actually, they didn't. They created it. Because these facades weren't built in the traditional sense of laying stone upon stone. Instead, they were carved out inch by inch, starting from the top of a mountain-like rock and working their way down. This reverse construction technique required not only skill but also incredible patience and precision, because a single mistake could ruin the entire structure. And in Petra, there was no room for error. The workers would climb to the top of the rocks, first carving the upper part, then lowering the platforms downward, sequentially carving the columns, arches, and those unique decorations. This was not only a physical feat, but also a mathematical one, because the workers had to determine how much of the stone to carve, its depth, and its proportions entirely by eye and using primitive measuring tools. It is important to remember that these details were shaped not by the hardness of the rock but by an aesthetic obsession, so it could take hours to carve a tiny detail at the top of a column. There were workers who spent days working on a single line. Some of the figures on the facades were so intricately detailed that a single wrong hammer blow could shatter the entire surface and ruin the work. That's precisely why the hands of those working there couldn't tremble. But imagine your head is pounding from the heat. Your hands are calloused. Breathing becomes impossible. And yet you continue to carve that stone with patience. Every curve, every relief that visitors marvel at today were works of art created under these arduous conditions. Legends and dark tales related to Petra. Petra was not only a city of rocks and sand, but also a city of secrets and whispers accumulated over thousands of years. Here, legends echo between the rock walls. Some are true, while others are dark stories passed down by word of mouth among the people. The locals talk about mysterious ghosts and curses that have been wandering around Petra's deep tunnels and secret rooms for centuries. According to them, the spirits of the workers who lost their lives during construction have not found peace, are trapped in the rock cavities, and say, "We are here," with moans echoing around the construction site at night. These voices turn into eerie whispers accompanied by cold winds. According to another legend, invisible powers and guardian spirits live in the largest temple at the heart of Petra, protecting it. These powers act against those who seek to plunder the city, causing those who take a wrong step to get lost among the rocks. Therefore, the disappearance of some explorers is explained not only by the harsh geographical conditions, but also by the wrath of these ancient guardians. Additionally, mysterious symbols and strange signs have been found during archaeological excavations in some areas of Petra. The meaning of these signs has not been fully deciphered, but they are accepted among the people as signs of ancient curses protecting the city. All these legends have given Petra not only a physical, but also a spiritual dimension. It is impossible for visitors not to feel these mysterious energies that cannot be seen with the naked eye. And perhaps that is why Petra's magic is shaped not only by the carving of stones, but also by dark secrets. As you walk among the magnificent stones of Petra, have you ever thought about the painful realities behind its dazzling beauty? The sweat, fears, and losses of thousands of people are hidden in these stones. Do you think such a great work was worth all that sacrifice? Or how was this place, which is now just an ordinary tourist spot for us, once the center of a nightmare? I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. And remember, behind every magnificent structure lies an unseen story. See you in the next video.